Hi, everybody. I'm Theresa Stirling. And guess what? Today we are going to talk about how to price and sell your work or your service. Either or, kind of interchangeable, but different, of course. I've had a lot of questions about this. We're also doing a Facebook Live tomorrow and can touch on this as well as doing some layering techniques. So make sure you tune into that. Today is Monday, the 16th. Gosh, I hope I have that right. Anyway, um, okay, we're gonna just jump right in. So you want to sell your artwork, for example, or your service. A couple of things are a given that you have a good website. Just have any good website that states clearly what you do, who you are, and maybe a little bit of your experience, just to give some credibility. And then you want to also be sure that you do have some examples of your work and some print materials that if you're talking with people, if you're having art shows, for example, you can leave these things behind. They're postcards, they have a picture of your work, maybe a title of the art, just something that then leads them over to your website. You just want to have that kind of reverberation and presence in the market. Now, actually pricing and selling your work or service, this is where it gets a little tricky. I think we'll focus mostly on art just because it seems like that's a very hot topic for people on our social media channels, asking, for example, how I've gotten to price my art, sell it, get in with collectors, projects, and so on. I think the first thing is to know what your market sweet spot is. I'm kind of looking at my notes, but you it's not the price you wish people would pay for your art or your service or your skill, but it's actually where your work consistently sells. And it takes a little bit of trial and error. I very quickly looked to what other people were doing and my contemporaries or those with more experience. Then I priced mine below that. And that makes sense to me for service too. Um, but do factor in your experience. You are charging for the hours on this piece, but not that alone. You're also charging for, the years that it took to create it, to learn it, to perhaps gain some mastery, to be evolving with your style. Just remembering that we bring all of our life experience to everything that we do or create. And so that's worth something. It really is. And I think lean into that. Um, but do pay attention to how things sell, and we'll talk more about that. Value your time. So your materials do matter in the case of selling your art, but also your time has some value. So if a commission takes 40 hours, for example, it should reflect that and be reasonable with it. You can nudge your prices up over time, and that's certainly what I have done over the years. If you're selling out, you're at or below the market rate for your art. And then you also want to consider your medium. For example, in art, oil, encaustic, sculpture, mixed media, photography, acrylics, they all sort of have different price points. In the case of encaustic art, which is largely where I focus, it's such a time and labor intensive art form. And it's a lot of layering. It's a lot of clicking on the fire or the heat gun. It's patience. It's maybe buffing towards the end. It's adding, it's mark making, it's scraping away. That to me is considered when I'm pricing the piece, just because acrylics and a few layers, not to undermine it, but it's not quite as labor intensive often. A lot of the encaustic pieces I do can be up to 10, 15, or 20 layers. So that's to think about too in consideration. And then look at comparable markets. So for example, um, artists at different stage, their different quality level, just different audience. You don't want to copy other people's prices per se, but maybe use it as a metric and say, how would my art splash into this market? Well, maybe you price it a little bit below and let the demand start to climb. That's a good feeling. And I studied supply and demand in college, so I think that's a good way to go. I always refer back to it. Um, and then consider location. So, for example, work selling in Aspen or Jackson Hole, Wyoming, or even a major city like Seattle. it may command different pricing than smaller markets. And consider that, factor that in. I think it's worthwhile. Track demand, pay attention. If your pieces sell immediately, you might be underpriced. Pay attention to that. Nudge it up. If nothing is moving for a long time, or if people aren't calling you for your services for a long, long time, maybe bring your prices back down a little bit, or maybe even donate a piece or a little bit of your time pro bono just to get some traction. And then don't price from emotion. I think this is a really important one. You might be in big love with a piece. Your option is to keep it, but I think just because you're in deep love with it doesn't mean that's how you have to price it commensurate on the market. And that's just something to pay attention to. Let the market provide that feedback for you, and it will. And then create consistency. I always think cohesive collections of artwork sell better, but do think about similar sizes and series. They should generally have a logical pricing structure. That's just, I think, good values overall. And then raise your prices gradually. I think that does make good sense. When I first started, I saw what more experienced artists in my medium were doing, but they also had a little bit deeper life experience, or maybe they were graphic designers, so they were fine art majors. I didn't consider myself in their league to start out at a higher price. I'm self-taught, and so I think I started out with a lower pricing, but I have been able to nudge it up over time. At this point, I do typically rely on a per square inch pricing model. However, I think there's consideration for very complex projects should be priced a little bit more. Very small projects might require more fine work and detail, so maybe price that accordingly. And then very, very large projects are more physical and demand much more. So they demand me to set up scaffolding or ladders, or several people to move them around. So just think about all those things. And I think, the goal isn't to be the cheapest artist or skilled service provider in the room. The goal is to create, a price that really does honor your work, it supports your business, and allows you to keep creating. That's how I look at it. I think those are great tenets, and I hope this was in some way helpful to all of you. I'm really happy you're along for the ride. Let us know if you have any questions. Always here for you, and let's go. All right. Thanks, you guys. Bye bye.